Hello there, this is A-Level Psychology, AQA, and this is Year 1 Social Influence. And in this video we're looking at Stanley Milgram's study, and in particular the evaluation of this study. We're not going to recap the study itself at all. We're just going to look at issues and criticisms and positives of the study. So let's start with ethics, because that's the obvious one. In terms of ethical issues, I'm sure you've spotted a number of these as you've looked at the study. Deception. He's telling people at the start that he's not telling them it's a study about obedience. He's telling them that it's a study about punishment and learning. So that's a really key big part of deception, that they don't understand what the study is actually about. Psychological harm. Participants are sweating, shaking, they're under the strain of being told to do something they don't agree is right. That's quite, a serious level of stress that they're being put under. A lack of informed consent, because they're being deceived, they can't give fully informed consent. They're told at the start that they have a right to withdraw, but then when they try to withdraw, they're told, no, you must continue. So while they technically do have a right to withdraw, you could argue that when they try to use it, they're not allowed to. So that is an issue with this study. So how Milgram dealt with these issues then? First of all, he did try to get, because of the informed consent being a problem, he tried to get presumptive consent, which hopefully, as you remember, is where you go to a similar group of participants and you tell them everything, and then you say, would you agree to take part had you known all that? And if they say, yes, we think this is okay, then you presume that the people in your experiment would also think the same. So Milgram did get presumptive consent, but it was with a different group of participants that were significantly different from the actual participants that he used. So while he's tried to deal with the issues, he's not quite done it perfectly. Right to withdraw, he would argue that he did give them the right to withdraw. He did tell them at the start that they had the right to withdraw. And equally, he would say that those prods were necessary, because in real life, you can't just say, oh, I don't want to do it, and they'll say, okay, then. It's not like that, is it? Full debrief, including counselling and follow-up for a year. So he didn't just abandon them afterwards. He'd offered them counselling, he gave them really extensive debriefing, and also followed up to make sure that they were still okay later. So again, it's not as straightforward as this is a clear ethical problem. He's taken steps to deal with it, but again, you can be asking the question, is it worth the cost? Right, again, let's look at internal validity then. So, if you remember, I've put the definition up in case you can't remember. Is the experiment actually measuring obedience? Are participants pretending, or do they really think they are giving electric shocks? This is something that's been questioned over time with this experiment. Are participants just playing along? And when we look at evidence about this, Sheridan and King actually ran a similar obedience study where it was actual real puppies and real shocks. And they got 100% obedience. So they're getting an even higher level of obedience when it's actually real. So that suggests the fact that you've got a similar finding within Milgram suggests that actually they do think they're giving shocks. The other question to ask really is, why would they be stressed or have seizures if they're only role-playing and just kind of playing along with the experiment? If you think they're not real electric shocks, why are you kind of worrying about whether you should press that next electric shock switch? There's no need for you to be stressed. You just flick it because you know it's not real. Whereas you can see, if you watch clips of the experiment, you can really see that they really are stressed about what they're being asked to do. So the evidence there is suggesting that the internal validity is pretty good, isn't it? Let's look on the other side of it, though. If you think about the fact that they're being asked to go into a prestigious university setting for demand characteristics, imagine perhaps if you were called up to go to Cambridge University to take part in a study. It's in really fancy buildings with big columns in front of them. You can imagine the pictures that you've seen. You go there and you people in lab coats and stuff. You kind of think, oh, you know, I've got to be careful with my behaviour here, don't you? So participants know that they're in that sort of setting, so they know they're in an experiment. Demand characteristics really may be playing a part here and affecting their behaviour and their natural reactions. So it suggests that it might not be, what you might not have is it might not actually be measuring obedience. And the other question is, why are obedience rates so much higher than they expected? So those two things really are questions about internal validity. On the other hand, which we've already talked about, you've got those 2 points saying that the participants are stressed and that other research agrees. So that's internal validity for Milgram's experiment. Let's look at external validity. So this is all about, can we generalise the results to other populations and other situations? And some points to consider here. The fact that it's a lab experiment and it's in a prestigious university, you could argue ecological validity could be low. You're not going to get the same result in another setting. However, Milgram did repeat it in a dodgy office block and got a slightly lower obedience rate, but not much lower, 48% to 65%. It's not a massive drop. So that suggests that the setting may have been having a small effect, but not a massive one. In terms of population validity, it's just been tested on American males, hasn't it? So from Milgram's original study, we can't be sure that it would be the same for females. Also, in real-life studies, you get high rates of obedience. So we'll look in a second at a study carried out in a hospital with nurses, and that kind of chimes with what Milgram found, that the rates of obedience are really high, both in real life as well, suggesting that we can generalise the results to other populations and settings. So let's have a look at that nurses study that I've just mentioned. This was carried out in a real hospital, and what they were trying to do was to see if they could get the nurse to break a load of rules. So a doctor would ring on the phone and give an instruction to a nurse, and there was someone waiting around the corner to stop them from actually giving the drug dose. But what they wanted to do is to see whether the nurse would go and basically prepare this drug to give to this person and go to administer it before they were stopped. And what they were doing, the reason it was something that they shouldn't be doing was that they were being told to administer a drug that was it was more than the maximum dose for a drug. It was a drug that's not on the ward stock list for the day. They're not meant to take a phone instruction, and they're not meant to act without a signed order from a doctor. So they're breaking lots of rules here by going ahead with this. And in this study, it's twice the maximum dose. It's a doctor they don't know. So, and what they found, as I said, really high level of obedience in this study. So that suggests that what Milgram's finding in his study does represent what really happens in everyday life. Right, so here's just a quick summary. Poor external validity might be because of your population validity being a male sample in the lab setting. However, we've got evidence also to show good external validity. Okay, so there we have it. Milgram's evaluation.